11 years ago, I uploaded a sermon onto the media streaming service YouTube entitled The Apocalypse, 1st of December 2013. It was the very first of all of the sermons that I'd ever uploaded to pass the lofty viewing figures of 100 people on YouTube. A couple of years later, I uploaded another sermon called The Apocalypse Part 2. It has, to today, some 9 years later, received 8 views at slightly less than 1 a year. As you know, sequels are never quite as good. People are captivated by apocalyptic predictions. Indeed, even the YouTube algorithm must have sent my first sermon to more viewers than usual. And historically, these predictions have tended to have the purpose of diverting attention away from actual crises like poverty or warfare, pushing political agendas. And we need to be careful about them because they have tended to promote hatred against certain groups as well. A big bunch of the medieval apocalyptic predictions in the church were squarely levelled at Jewish people, stunk of anti-Semitism. And indeed, when you get to the period of the Reformations, you see all of these apocalyptic predictions springing up, and in their target is either the historic Roman Catholic Church or the upcoming Protestants. The Protestants think that the Roman Catholic Church and the popes are bringing about the end of the world, and the Roman Catholics think that these new upstart Protestants are doing it. A few years ago, 2012, some number of polls were taken across about 20 countries as to whether or not people thought that the world would end within their lifetime. And at the time, it was 15% of people who thought that it would. A few years later, 2015, and that number in our nation had jumped to a quarter of people who thought that the apocalypse was likely within their own lifetimes. Mostly, they thought, from the threat of nuclear destruction. On the flip side, in that same poll, 1/4 of the people polled thought that the human species would never die out. And now, whilst it was unlikely that the world was going to end in their lifetime, for those who said that, it is absolutely certain that those who claim the human species will never die out were wrong, because I'm afraid, brothers and sisters, and I hope this doesn't come as a spoiler to you, we are not here forever. Let me give you a little taste of some of the apocalyptic predictions in the history of the church. In the year 70, Simon bar Giora, one of the Jewish Essenes, saw the Jewish uprising against the Roman occupation in 66 to 70 as the final battle, the beginning of the end times. And by his authority, coins were stamped declaring the redemption of Israel to be nigh. In the year 500, Hippolytus of Rome, Sextus Julius, Africanus and Irenaeus, all three of them predicted that Jesus would return that year. He did not. And so, very wisely, Sextus Julianus Africanus revised his prediction from the year 500 to the year 800. Nearly all of these make the mistake of predicting it to be within their lifetimes, which of course enables them to be proved wrong. He made the very wise decision of predicting some 300 years hence, when he wouldn't be around to see whether or not he was right. Fast forward to the year 1000, Sylvester II, Pope, he predicts this date as the millennium, when the end times will begin. Riots occur across Europe, and huge swathes of pilgrims head east for Jerusalem. Joachim of Fiore, the Italian mystic, predicts that the end times will arrive sometime between 1200 and 1260. They do not, but his followers, his disciples, the Joachimites, after his 1260 prediction fails, they try 1290. When that fails, they try 1335. When that fails, they try 1378. And after not striking it lucky the fourth time, they give up on their predictions. 1492 was a date that many Russians believed would be the beginning of the end. It would represent the 7th millennium since the counting of the Byzantine calendar. And so literally was this believed that the Russian Orthodox Church didn't bother computing the date of Easter any later than 1491. In 1524, a group of astrologers here in London predicted the world would end by a flood that begun in this city. 20,000 Londoners fled for higher ground in anticipation. In 1780, the General Assembly of members in Connecticut gathered, and the sky turned dark on the 19th of May. There was a fire nearby in the forest and a fog, and it was a bit cloudy. Camille Flammarion in 1910 noted that the appearance of Halley's Comet would impregnate the atmosphere and snuff out all life on the planet. He made a good deal of money selling comet pills to protect against the noxious gases. Very often we hear of prophecy and we think fortune telling. But when we do that, we have committed a category error. We've understood what sphere prophecy falls into incorrectly. It'd be a bit like, imagine someone came to visit and to learn what the Church of England was, and so we brought them to St Mary's, and we took them to Mary Mag's up the road, down to All Saints. We took them up to the diocesan offices in Trinity House, and then we showed them the cathedral. And after seeing all of those things, they said, well, yes, I've seen St Mary's, and I've seen Mary Mag's, and I've seen All Saints, and I've seen Trinity House, I've seen the cathedral, but when are you going to show me the Church of England? They've made a mistake thinking that the Church of England is a thing that you can touch and see, a place that you can go, when it's in fact the culmination of all of the bits and pieces that we were showing them and much more. And similarly too, sometimes we hear prophecy and we think fortune telling. We shouldn't think that if we've read our scriptures, because we should know how heavily in the Hebrew scriptures God comes down against those who practice augury and other forms of fortune telling. But we need to get in our minds the sense that prophecy is about social commentary, that just in the same way that all those people that I was listening to you earlier were speaking about the end times coming more or less to a man within their own lives, so too the prophets speak of the situations and the context in which they find themselves. Whether we're thinking about the prophecy in the Hebrew scriptures, like the one we heard today from Jeremiah, that sounds so obviously to our ears as we look back to be about Jesus, or whether the passage that we read in the Gospel, that roadmap to the end times, we must understand them in their contemporary contexts. Just as no one predicts that the world is going to finish in 4,000 years, so the prophets are writing about their current situations. You know, when they describe a great beast from the east who'd be bringing destruction, they're talking about Babylon, the Babylon who's already grabbed their intellectuals and taken them away into exile and has enslaved their labourers. They're not speaking about Putin's Russia some 2,500 years later. Now, none of this is to say that there aren't universal themes to be drawn from their writing. When Jeremiah speaks of God causing a righteous branch to spring up for David, executing justice and righteousness in the land, he's probably thinking of a Jewish leader who's going to free their people from the current Babylonian captivity. But any human liberation can only ever be a shadow of the liberation wrought by God. Just like I was telling you last week when we were talking about baptism, how Noah and his family being saved from the flood, how the Israelites being saved through the Red Seas, how they're all shadows of the freedom and the liberation we experience in baptism. So too the prophets are speaking about their own times, but they are teaching us something universal about all time, something that we see fulfilled in Jesus. We come to know that people get trapped in wicked regimes, people get trapped in the prison of their own sin. We get to know through the prophets that no matter how dark the current times, be it Babylon or be it the problems of our own age, hope dawns on the horizon. The Thessalonians that Paul's speaking to in our second reading, they are getting caught up in the start of that letter all on the wheres and the whys and the whens and the hows of Christ's return. They want to understand it functionally. And Paul's message to them is a bit that we heard towards the end. And it serves those of us who are still anticipating Jesus' second advent just as well. And it is this: be prepared. You don't know when it will be, so just always be ready. And how can you be ready? Well, Paul says, pursue justice and abound evermore in love. Advent, this time before Christmas, it teaches us about waiting. It teaches us that no matter the depth of despair in the present time, there is always hope ahead. It teaches us that while we wait, we should be getting on with the business that God has left us. And that is not vain attempts to calculate Christ's return, but that is pursuing justice and loving our neighbours. Amen.